for inviting us today. So we're going to be presenting work that we've been doing for the past 2 or 3 years. That's part of the ECHO network, which is a CIHR funded program that crosses Canada. And the tool that we're presenting the version that we did for New Brunswick, but our colleagues in BC and Alberta have also been working on similar project, and we're going to address that. And this is work that's been done in collaboration with the Université de Moncton and the New Brunswick Environmental Network. So when we talk about resource development, it's really important to understand that there will be impacts that come from activities that we've done on the territory for many years, and we have to understand how that's going to bring us in the future. So it's really important to have the cascade of effects to understand really how impacts are ongoing on our territory. So in the ECHO network, what we've been doing is really working with community partners and health partners to develop integrative tools and processes to help us take notice for action of all these resource extraction activities that go on in our different territories. And this type of tool, when we decided to do a version for New Brunswick, it was really coming from an ask from different partners in the province and from work that we had been doing with the New Brunswick Environmental Network, and our need to understand impacts that go beyond just understanding health, environment, but also includes socioeconomic and kind of integrates all of them. So the NBEnviroScreen, and I'm going to pass the mic to Saadia soon. This has been her work during her master's degree, but it's based on the CalEnviroScreen methodology that was developed in California to look at integrated pollution load and socioeconomic and health data. It is important to understand that it's a relativist tool. It will compare different communities, so it's not something that will give you something that's absolute, but it allows us to understand on one territory what's going on, where are the most vulnerable communities for that area, and then it helps us in building better policies. So it helps us prioritize area of concern. It is equity informed, and we'll get into that, and integrates community, environment, and health indicators. So Saadia, the floor is yours. Ton micro.
Okay, thank you, Celine. So I want to start to talk about the CalEnviroScreen. So the CalEnviroScreen is the open access mapping tool developed by the California Office of Environmental Health Risk Assessment. And it allows us to develop an index to make a relative comparison of different geographical areas. So for the CalEnviroScreen, we have two big groups of indicators. We have the population burden and population characteristic, pollution burden and population characteristic. So for the pollution burden, we have like a subgroup, two subgroups, so exposure and environmental effect. And for the population characteristic, we have the sensitive population. So when we talk about the sensitive population, it's more about the health and the socio-economic factor. So how we can do the calculation of the index and the preparation of the map. So for the CalEnviroScreen, I talk about the two big group of indicators. So for each group, we have the score of 0 to 10. So 0 to 10 for pollution burden, 0 to 10 for the population characteristic. And for each subgroup of indicator, we have the weight of 1. So exposure, sensitive population, socioeconomic factor, we have the weight of 1. But for the environmental effect, the weight is 0.5. So we use the formula of equation rank to do our calculations. So that can help us to have the percentile. And after that, we will do like the average of percentile to have a score, and the product of the score of two big group of indicators give us the CalEnviroScreen. So if I can resume that, is the CalEnviroScreen is the product for average exposure and environmental effect, and the average sensitive population and socioeconomic factor. And in our case, we are in the New Brunswick, so for our tool is the NBEnviroScreen. So what I did in my thesis is that we want to use the same methodology that the California developed to apply that in the New Brunswick to see if that can work. So we use the methodology of CalEnviroScreen to develop the NBEnviroScreen. And after that, now we are in the step of the contextualize the tool. So we want to contextualize that more in the reality of the New Brunswick to have the NBEnviroScreen. The first thing we did is to identify the list of indicators we want to use. So here is the indicator of the environmental exposure and environmental effects, so the indicator for the pollution burden. And we can see like the difference between what we use and what the CalEnviroScreen use. So we have the same thing like the PM 2.5, the ozone, but we add in the NBEnviroScreen some indicator for the climate change, like the precipitation and the temperature. But you can see that some indicator that the CalEnviroScreen use, we didn't use that. Example for the pesticide, we didn't have the data for the New Brunswick. It's very difficult for us to have the data for the 33 community that we use to develop our map. It's the same thing with the environmental effect. We can say that we had the number of contaminate set, but for all other indicators is the same. So here is the first map for the pollution burden. So I can say the pollution burden is the product between environmental exposure and environmental effect. So we can see in the map that we have like 3 regions in the north of the province. The one region like Brunswick, Bristol, we have Saint John, Oromocto. Next, please. And after that, we identify some indicator that we want to use for the population characteristic. So here too, we can see that we start to add some indicator like hypertension or cancer. Cancer is very important because it is a big problem here in New Brunswick. For the first version of the tool, what we did, we use like different type of cancer. So it's not a specific type that we use for this version. After that, for the socio-economic factor, we start to make some change. Here, for example, for the linguistic isolation, we change that by the percentage of non-bilingual population, because in New Brunswick, we think that the linguistic isolation is not I think it's not a big deal, but when we talk about New Brunswick, it's more about French and English, so the 2 official languages. So we decide to use the percentage of non-bilingual population. And we add, one thing we had to is the age, median age. I think the New Brunswick is one of the provinces that the population is very old, so it's very important to use this kind of indicator. So we can see that we start to do some change for the NBEnviroScreen. Next, thank you, Celine. So here is the map for the population characteristic. So for the map for the population characteristic, we can see that we have the indicator for sensitive population. So this is all the indicator. And here is the indicator of socioeconomic factors. So it is like the combination of the 2 subgroup of indicator. And now we can see in the map the result that we have a lot of region in the north of the province of New Brunswick. And we have some similarity with our pollution burden too, because 3 of the regions that we see in our last map, we can see that here too, like Dalhousie, Campbellton, Bathurst, and we have some region of St. George or Minto. So it's very interesting to see that. Next, please. Okay. So the NBEnviroScreen is a combination of the two maps, so pollution burden and population characteristics. So when we put them two maps together, we have this result. So the same region, the Campbellton, Dalhousie, Bathurst, we can see that here. And after that, we have Perton, Nakawik, Minto, St. George, and St. John. So for the three regions in the north of the province, I think what is very interesting and important is like, we can see in the history that this region have like a rich history of natural resource extraction. In the north of the region, in the past year, we saw a lot of, I think, smelter, pulp and mill, thermal plant, mine in Bathurst. And if we take the region like the Perth and Dover, Brunswick, Bristol, and Akawaki, is more about agriculture and forestry. So that is very interesting to see that, this kind of result in the map. And after that, we have Minto. So Minto is one of the region, one of the community that where are situated like the first mine call. And in Minto, I think in the past year we have a thermal plant too. And St. John, I think I don't have to explain a lot because St. John is St. John. St. John have the rich history of natural resource extraction too, like the raffinery. And we have St. George, more is the pearl and mine. So this version of tool, I think is not perfect, but is a good, for me, for my thesis, when I start to do that, is the good result. But it's very interesting because that helps us to understand more the history of natural resource here in New Brunswick, and to see some interaction between the socio-economic factor, the health factor, and the environmental factor. And we have different things that we can see in this kind of map. So we start to do like some interactive map, and that help us to have like to see for each indicator, and it's very, very interesting. But we need to improve that and to use other indicator, because the indicator I use is more about the heavy industry, and we need to include in that like the indicator for agriculture, fishery, and agriculture, fishery, and forestry. And this kind of indicator is very important because because of this of the economy of New Brunswick. So now I pass to Celine. Thank you.
Thank you, Saadia. And just one thing I'll add before we go to the next slide is that if you remember the pollution burden and the population characteristic, Campbellton, Dalhousie, and Bathurst do come out as more vulnerable. But what was really interesting for us is to see that St. John is actually the first that comes out in terms of pollution burden. But when we combine the socioeconomic and health indicators with the pollution burden indicator, it comes out less than the northern region. So there's really interesting things in terms of equity and where resources go and where the money from resource extraction goes. So those are the type of lessons that we can start to learn with this type of tool. So it was really important for us during the construction of this tool to really be in close contact with our partners in the New Brunswick community. So for the work that Saadia showed you is really this part of the work where we did had constant communication with different stakeholders from government, but also from communities in New Brunswick to validate the indicators that we wanted to use and also address data availability in New Brunswick. And as we did that first version of the EnviroScreen that we just showed you, we then did focus group with different people from New Brunswick to start the discussion on where we need to go now. So we're really conscious that what we're presenting here is a partial picture of where we need to go, and this so we're continuing this work to really make it New Brunswick focus even more. So another lesson or realization that we had through this work is when we compared the work that we did in New Brunswick to the work that our colleagues did in Alberta and BC, one thing that was quite interesting for us is that we're interested in looking at ecosystem boundaries and ecosystem scale to understand cumulative impact on the territory. And when you look at New Brunswick, the communities that we had are not perfectly matched with watershed in New Brunswick, but they're close and much closer than what we would find in Alberta and BC, which were colonized much later and tend to have really straight lines in the definition of their regional districts. So for New Brunswick, that's something that was really interesting for us to kind of start the understanding around ecosystem boundaries. So Saadia addressed some of these, but it's really important to understand the history and the context of natural resource extraction in our province. So when we look at a map such as what we have, we need to look at that map and tell the stories of the different communities that are emerging. And for Northern New Brunswick, I think the story that is unfolding is one that doesn't surprise us, but at the same time that needs to be addressed in how we do policy in New Brunswick, that we have a rich history of natural extraction, and unfortunately, the money from that or the wealth from those extraction is not staying in those regions. So how can we address that? How can we make the living conditions in that part of the province better? So it does help address social inequity. So by combining those indicators, we really start to have those social inequity emerge, which is different from looking at all those indicators differently. So there were surprises when we started to overlay them. In what we've heard in our focus group, what we knew also as we were going in is that the CalEnviroScreen is not perfect for the reality of New Brunswick, and it tends to not look at things like forestry, agriculture, or fishing, which is important in our province. So we need to figure out what are the best indicators to include in the next version, and that's where we're at. So it does help build intersectoral capacity to respond to these cumulative impact of natural resource development. And we've seen that through the interactions that we've had with the different stakeholders in New Brunswick. So I think that the tool is really important in having us see a picture of New Brunswick that really integrates these type of data, but it's also the process that follows the creation of the tool and the iteration that we're doing to get to a new version that also helps the different people that will build the next policy to understand these cumulative impact and do those the interrelation that we need to have between the different sectors in New Brunswick. So cumulative impacts and development choice are really important. It needs to take into account the different jurisdiction, equity issues, the priority for the community development, and also responsibilities that we have. So how can we go from an electoralist approach to really have the interests of the community for the long term? So how can we get to a better model of integrated health, such as examples that we have from the First Nations in Canada? So I thank you very much for your attention, and we'll be happy to answer questions.